I still remember the exact moment it all began, a single door slam that rattled me to the bone. It was a sweltering Saturday afternoon, one of those days when the sunshine seems to liquefy on the pavement and the air stands entirely still. I just finished setting up a folding table in my driveway for the kids. They were due in a matter of minutes for my volunteer tutoring session, and I had carefully arranged worksheets and colored pins, as well as pitchers of cold lemonade. I recall glancing up at the sky to check if any clouds might offer a bit of shade. That's when the echoing thud of a neighbor's door snapped me back to reality, her door. A chill skittered across my spine, even in the scorching heat. "What on earth is going on here?" came the shrill, piercing voice that could only belong to the woman everyone in the neighborhood had begun calling HOA Karen, but certainly not to her face. She was the living, breathing definition of the moniker, mid-50s, impeccably coiffed short hair, tennis visor even though she never played tennis, and a walking air of entitled fury just waiting for a target. She marched across the street with such conviction that I half expected the asphalt to melt under her feet out of sheer fear. She jabbed a manicured finger at my folding table, her voice an octave too high. "We have rules against unapproved gatherings in the community," she snapped. "You're violating multiple HOA bylaws." Little did she know that her words that day would spark a months-long conflict, one that would involve late-night letters, secret meetings, a surprising act of sabotage, and eventually the entire school board. How it escalated so far, I could never have predicted. But if you're curious to witness just how high the stakes could climb and how intense neighborhood conflicts can become, stay with me until the end. I promise this story only grows more dramatic from here. My name is Jessica. By day, I'm a middle school English teacher. By the time the final bell rings, I pack up my things and head home. Yet my dedication to education doesn't shut off with the lights in my classroom. That's why I started offering free tutoring sessions to underprivileged kids in the local area. Many of them came from just outside our HOA's official boundaries. They lived in cramped apartments or in parts of the city with less robust school resources. Some parents couldn't afford private tutors or supplemental schooling. So I figured, if I had the knowledge and a quiet space, why not set up a little workshop on my driveway? Nothing fancy, just a table, chairs, notebooks, and a whiteboard propped against my garage door. But evidently, to certain individuals in our affluent cul-de-sac, that small act of generosity was an outrage. In most neighborhoods, a neighbor might greet the sight with curiosity, maybe even gratitude. Not here, and certainly not from HOA Karen. She always seemed to have a sixth sense for anything that could be viewed as an infraction. Maybe it was the plastic tables. Maybe it was the sight of children she thought didn't belong. Or maybe, as I would later discover, it was the massive chip on her shoulder, an odd desire to micromanage everyone's lives, or a prejudicial belief that these underprivileged kids would somehow threaten our community's prestige. My first official run-in with her started politely enough, if only for the first 2 minutes. She marched over, posture stiff as a board. "Are you aware you need HOA approval for any gathering of more than 4 people on your property?" she demanded. She said it in a way that made gatherings sound more like unlawful congregation. I placed a gentle hand on top of the stack of textbooks, reminding myself to stay calm. "I'm aware there's a rule about big parties or events," I replied carefully. "But this is just tutoring. It's not loud or disruptive. It's simply me helping local kids with their homework." She pursed her lips. "You're bringing non-residents onto the property. That's considered a major violation." I explained that I had asked a few of the neighbors who actually lived inside the HOA boundaries if they minded. So far, everyone I talked to was fine with it. Some even applauded it. But in Karen's mind, that made no difference. "I'll be filing an official complaint," she said icily, and with that, she spun on her heel and stormed away, leaving the air thick with tension. The kids arrived about 15 minutes later. I remember plastering a smile on my face to greet them, but inside I was rattled. The last thing I wanted was a fight with the HOA. Still, the tutoring session went smoothly, and we covered some key algebra concepts, reading comprehension drills, and a few fun brain teasers. The children were bright, polite, and deeply appreciative, everything that contradicted Karen's ominous warnings about them. Little did I know, that day was just the prologue. A week passed with no major incident. Sure, I'd catch glimpses of Karen's topaz blue eyes peering from behind her curtains, but I tried not to pay it much attention. Then, one Thursday evening, I received a letter in my mailbox from the HOA board. It was stamped with that official seal we had all come to dread. I opened it at the kitchen counter. My roommate, Tara, a local nurse, peeked over my shoulder. The gist: a warning that I was hosting regular gatherings with non-residents in violation of standard HOA protocol. The letter demanded I cease all unauthorized group activities immediately or face punitive measures, including fines and possible further action. It was official, typed, and accompanied by half a dozen references to obscure subsections of our bylaws. Tara let out a low whistle. "That's intense," she said. "I don't understand how they can be so strict about something so harmless." I spent the rest of the evening combing through the HOA rulebook. It was a mind-numbing compilation of restrictions, fence heights, driveway usage, painting guidelines. But nowhere did I find a rule explicitly banning educational gatherings, especially not 4 or 5 kids with workbooks. However, I found a vague line about needing approval for any organized recurring event hosted by an HOA member. That gave them enough wiggle room to potentially throw me under the bus. I visited the HOA office the next day. It was a small, nondescript building near the entrance of our community. Inside, I was greeted by a younger assistant who seemed a bit overwhelmed. I asked if there was any official complaint on record. She looked it up and said, "Yes, Ms. Wilson lodged a complaint claiming your sessions were disruptive and might bring down property values." Ms. Wilson, HOA Karen. Well, that was no shock. So, with my breath catching in my throat, I requested a meeting with the board. Better to address it head-on than let it fester. The assistant was kind and professional, giving me a date 2 weeks out. That was the earliest available time I could sit down with the entire board. I walked out, still determined to keep tutoring, but an unease prickled at the back of my neck. That weekend, I held the sessions as usual. True to her word, Karen had escalated her campaign. She walked around my property, phone in hand, presumably snapping pictures or taking videos, anything to compile evidence. It was uncomfortable for the kids, some of whom noticed and asked if they were doing something wrong. I tried to reassure them it was all fine, but inside, my anger simmered. This is not okay, I remember telling myself. She's messing with children's confidence for the sake of her bizarre vendetta. Over the next few days, I overheard more comments from neighbors. A couple of them confided that Karen had been knocking on doors, stirring up anxiety. "She's telling everyone that having these kids here opens us to vandalism or burglary," said Mrs. Blake, the sweet retiree next door. My stomach twisted. This was beyond a simple complaint. It reeked of prejudice. To think that a group of earnest, enthusiastic kids, most of whom just wanted help studying, could be seen as criminals was offensive on every conceivable level. Within my job as an English teacher, I have contact with the local school board fairly often. The board members, along with the local superintendent, appreciate any outside academic support for the district. So I reached out to Ms. Delgado, the board member who'd always been a champion of after-school programs. Her response was immediate and supportive. "Jessica," she said over the phone, "this is amazing, what you're doing. The board would definitely back you. If the HOA tries to muzzle your volunteer work, we can speak up." I felt relief flood through me. That would mean a lot, I told her. But I don't want to escalate it if I don't have to. I'm meeting with them in 2 weeks. She paused. "If they threaten you with legal action, the school board has attorneys who can help. Keep me posted." That promise felt like a lifeline, though I hoped it wouldn't come to that. Meanwhile, I had to navigate the delicate balance of living in a community policed by one controlling person. It's a tricky equation. You don't want to be a pushover, but you also have to mind your day-to-day peace. The 2 weeks leading up to the HOA board meeting passed, like the ominous quiet before a tornado. Karen kept her distance physically, but I felt her presence in other ways. My mailbox started filling with anonymous notes, some typed, some handwritten. The gist of each: "Stop bringing in those kids," or "We don't want trouble here." Some were more hostile, telling me I was ruining the neighborhood. It was disconcerting how quickly the prejudice spread. Most of my immediate neighbors voiced support, but it became clear that fear can be contagious. A rumor circulated that one of the kids had stolen a wallet from someone's porch, which was a complete fabrication. But sometimes, all it takes is a whisper of wrongdoing to sow seeds of distrust. Tara found me one evening hunched over my laptop, eyes bloodshot, scouring the legal jargon in the HOA bylaws yet again. "You okay?" she asked, placing a comforting hand on my shoulder. I swallowed hard and stared at the screen. I just hate the idea that these kids are being branded as criminals just because they come from a different zip code, I said. "They've done absolutely nothing wrong." She nodded, pulled up a chair, and leaned in. "Listen, I'm proud of you," she said softly. You're not backing down, and you're doing something good. That's rare. Her words helped. I had to keep going. The day of the HOA board meeting arrived, and my heart hammered like a drumline in my chest. I walked into the small conference room at the HOA office, portfolio in hand, stuffed with lesson plans, attendance rosters, and a petition signed by supportive neighbors. Around a large table sat 5 board members, 3 men in suits, 1 woman in a crisp blouse, and of course, Karen, who clutched a thick folder and wore a triumphant smirk. The board's president, a middle-aged man named Mr. Franklin, cleared his throat. We're here to discuss the complaint lodged by Ms. Wilson against Ms. Jessica. He squinted at his notes. Sanders. Specifically, the alleged violation of HOA guidelines regarding the tutoring of non-residents within the community. I forced a polite smile. Good evening. Thank you for the opportunity to address this. Then, I systematically explained my volunteer tutoring sessions, how they were small, quiet, academically focused, and took place on my personal property during reasonable hours. I emphasized the positive impact on the children's education, how it cost the HOA nothing and benefited the local community. Karen's turn came next. She laid out a litany of complaints: noise, increased foot traffic, potential for property damage, lack of accountability, and no official supervision. While she spoke, I noticed how she carefully avoided mentioning the children's backgrounds overtly. Yet an undercurrent of fear-mongering wove through her arguments, painting the kids as potential vandals or thieves. It was infuriating, but I kept my composure, suspecting that losing my cool would only play into her narrative. Once she finished, I gently challenged her accusations. These children have never caused any trouble, I said. They arrive, we study, they leave. My immediate neighbors can confirm there's no excessive noise. And as for lack of supervision, I'm their teacher. If anything, they're better supervised than a typical group of neighborhood kids playing in the street. Mr. Franklin nodded thoughtfully. Another board member asked a few perfunctory questions. Then came the moment of truth. We'll deliberate, he said, and get back to you within a week. Karen's smirk made it clear she thought she'd already won. But something in Mr. Franklin's measured tone gave me a spark of hope. 3 days later, I was teaching at school when my phone buzzed. It was Tara. She rarely called during my work hours, so I excused myself during a short break. Tara's voice was trembling when she spoke. Jess, you need to come home. Your house, someone's messed with the driveway. And your table. It looks destroyed. My heart dropped to my stomach. After rushing through the rest of my class and making sure a substitute could cover me for the final period, I drove home in a frenzy. When I arrived, I nearly dropped my keys at the sight. My folding table was upended, the legs broken. Papers were scattered everywhere, math worksheets, reading guides, even some personal notes I kept about each student's progress. Over near the garage, the small whiteboard I used had been shattered. A rock lay next to it, evidence of vandalism. Neighbors were milling about, concerned. Some expressed sympathy, others confusion. I found footprints in the dried mud near the side of the house, though it was impossible to identify. One of my neighbors claimed she heard a commotion late the previous night, but she hadn't seen who caused it. I won't say I immediately suspected Karen. Vandalism is a serious crime, after all, and I had no proof. Still, everything in my gut told me this was either her doing or someone she'd incited to take action. I filed a police report, took pictures, and then called Ms. Delgado from the school board to let her know what had happened. She sounded outraged and promised to bring it up in the next board meeting. The sense of violation was overwhelming. I had to reassure the kids, who showed up the next day ready to study, that everything was still okay. We ended up using the back patio, a hastily found replacement table, and borrowed notebooks. I refused to let intimidation tactics scare me into stopping, but the emotional toll was real. Word spread quickly about the vandalism, and surprisingly, it drew some strong backlash against Karen and the handful of residents who seemed to support her. I wasn't typically one to bring personal drama into public view, but news travels fast in a tight-knit, albeit drama-prone community. Mrs. Blake, my sweet next-door neighbor, organized a small potluck to show support. As I arrived, I saw about 15 neighbors gathered. Some brought dishes, others flowers, and a few carried brand-new notebooks and supplies for the kids. A large banner read, "We support education for all." Emotion welled up inside me. I never expected such a tangible outpouring of solidarity. People took turns offering short, impassioned speeches about how we should welcome anyone who needs help. Then Mr. Kelly, an older gentleman with 2 grown children, approached me. "My kids are off at college now," he said. "If you want more space to hold your sessions, you can use our backyard. We have a covered patio. No one's using it for anything important, and you'll have more shade." I was touched by the generosity, but I also felt a renewed sense of resolve to continue in my own driveway, if that's what I chose. "Thank you," I said. "I'll let you know." That means the world to me. Near the end of the potluck, I noticed Karen lurking at the edge of the park area, arms crossed. Even from a distance, her scowl was unmistakable. She stayed only a few minutes before hopping into her pristine SUV and driving away. She didn't say a word to anyone, but that fleeting glimpse confirmed she was feeling the social pressure. Our little community gathering was proof that she was not the neighborhood's singular voice. Just when I thought everything was at a standstill, Ms. Delgado called. "We're holding a special session," she announced, her tone decisive. "We're drafting a statement in support of your tutoring program, and we'd like you to attend the school board meeting next Thursday. Parents and community members are invited." My relief was mixed with nerves. Taking this issue public was a big step, but it might finally muzzle Karen's campaign. The next Thursday evening, I arrived at the local high school auditorium. A modest crowd had gathered, mostly parents whose children attended local schools. Some I recognized from my tutoring sessions. Others were strangers. The meeting started with some regular board business, but soon Ms. Delgado introduced the topic. "We have a teacher in our district, Ms. Jessica Sanders, who's been volunteering her time to tutor children, many of whom are from underprivileged backgrounds. There has been some pushback from her homeowners association, specifically attempts to shut down these sessions." She opened the floor, and I stood up to speak. My voice trembled at first, but I steadied myself by recalling the faces of the kids I helped. I explained the joys and challenges of the sessions, the blatant vandalism, and the prejudice they'd faced. I tried to keep my tone measured yet passionate. One by one, supportive parents echoed my sentiments. "As a single mother, I rely on programs like these," said a woman who stepped up to the microphone. "It breaks my heart that someone would try to stop them." Another father said, "My daughter has improved her reading level thanks to Ms. Sanders. We're not from your fancy neighborhood, but she was never judged, until now, apparently." Finally, Ms. Delgado announced the statement. "The school board fully supports any district teacher's efforts to improve academic outcomes for our students, regardless of the location, provided it's safe and respects the rights of others. We call on the relevant HOA to withdraw any baseless complaints and allow Ms. Sanders to continue her valuable work." Applause rippled through the crowd. The local news station had sent a small camera crew, and they filmed the entire segment. By the time the meeting ended, I had more offers of assistance, from spare supplies to new tutoring venues. And I had a hunch that once this story went public, Karen wouldn't be able to feign ignorance or hide behind the HOA's official channels quite so easily. Of course, this public display of unity only served to deepen Karen's resolve. She must have seen the coverage. Her face was plastered in the background of some footage from a previous HOA event, though the news station didn't identify her by name. Still, she wasted no time in drafting a new, scathing letter. Except this time, it wasn't just directed at me. She wrote an open letter to the neighborhood, which she posted in mailboxes and on the community's private online forum. In that letter, she railed against outside influences and unwelcome elements, doubling down on her claim that the presence of these kids lowered property values. The letter concluded with a thinly veiled warning. Sooner or later, these children's families will come to visit, and the next thing you know, our quiet streets will be overrun with strangers. The dog whistle nature of her words made me sick to my stomach. Now, it was undeniably about prejudice. She was peddling fear, painting innocent young students as a threat. A few neighbors confronted her online. Others simply ignored the letter. But the damage was done. Rumors swirled, tensions rose, and lines were drawn. One neighbor, a woman named Paige, admitted she was no longer comfortable letting her daughter attend the tutoring sessions. "I'm sorry," she told me apologetically. "I know it's silly, but I just don't want drama." I understood, but it stung to see how effective fear can be. Despite the negativity, a core group of kids kept coming, supported by their parents who saw the situation for what it was: blatant discrimination. With every new letter Karen distributed, the more the school board and many in the wider community rallied around me. Yet the personal toll was enormous. My stress level skyrocketed, I lost sleep, and each day, I wondered if I'd find more vandalism or even legal threats on my doorstep. At the urging of Ms. Delgado, I decided to consult with the school board's legal advisor. He explained the complicated terrain of homeowners associations. They have some latitude to impose rules, but typically, you can't infringe on personal rights, such as the right to have guests on your property, without a legitimate reason, he said. This is borderline discrimination. Keep documenting everything. So I documented everything. Every note I received, every conversation, every suspicious incident. I also had the presence of mind to use a security camera installed above my garage. I'd set it up mainly to deter further vandalism, and it captured footage of my driveway 24/7. This was all in hopes of catching something incriminating if more sabotage occurred. Karen, meanwhile, seemed to step up her intimidation. She or some ally of hers would sometimes drive slowly past when the kids were there, filming us on a phone. One afternoon, one of my students, Marco, got spooked by the SUV creeping by. "Why are they staring at us like that?" he whispered, glancing up from his geometry worksheet. My heart lurched. "They're just curious," I said, forcing a brave face. Inside, my frustration simmered. These children didn't deserve this cloak-and-dagger environment. Still, we pressed on, lesson by lesson, day by day. One night around midnight, I woke to the sound of muffled footsteps on my front porch. My heart pounded. I tiptoed to the window, and through a small gap in the curtains, I saw a figure crouching near my mailbox. Fear coursed through me. I considered calling the police immediately but hesitated, wanting to see if the security camera would capture a clear shot. Sure enough, the figure scribbled something on a piece of paper or envelope, then slid it in my mailbox. When they turned back toward the street, the porch light illuminated them just enough for the camera to catch a partial view of their face. My pulse thundered, but I couldn't conclusively identify them. They wore a hoodie pulled low over their brow. The next morning, I retrieved what turned out to be another ominous note. "Stop the tutoring, or you'll be sorry." This time, I promptly called the police. They came, took a report, and asked for my security footage. The officer told me they'd do some neighborhood patrols and check if the cameras in the area picked up any suspicious vehicles. I tried to keep a brave facade, especially for the kids, but inside I felt a sense of dread. The conflict had escalated from snarky letters to actual threats. I shared the note with Ms. Delgado and the school board's legal advisor. They responded with immediate condemnation. More parents joined in solidarity, outraged that children's educational opportunities were being threatened in such a cowardly manner. A few days later, a break in the tension came when the police found something interesting on another neighbor's camera footage. This neighbor's camera caught the same hooded figure walking by. The next morning, the authorities tracked a lead that turned out to be a false alarm. They concluded that, based on the suspect's clothing and silhouette, it was likely a teenager or a younger adult, not Karen herself. Yet the seeds of doubt had been planted. If it wasn't Karen, who else would be so invested in scaring me into stopping the tutoring? Could it be someone else Karen had swayed to her viewpoint? A relative of hers? One of the homeowners who was scared or bigoted enough to lash out. All of a sudden, the story took on a life of its own, overshadowing the original dispute. The local news ran another segment. Teacher threatened for tutoring underserved students. They interviewed me briefly and got a generic statement from the HOA's board about safety and due process. Karen refused to comment, only fueling speculation. Despite the swirling rumors and tension, we kept tutoring, just more discreetly. We used Mr. Kelly's backyard for a few sessions to ease the pressure. Then, an unexpected ally emerged. The local library offered me a free room on weekends. It was a wonderful gesture, but still, I refused to surrender my right to tutor on my own property. The library was an add-on, an extra space for those who needed it. After the second vandalism incident, a smashed flower pot that some of my students had decorated, I grew determined to catch whoever was behind this. The security camera footage from my garage had proven inconclusive before, so I expanded my coverage. With the help of another neighbor, I set up an additional camera that covered more angles, including the sidewalk in front of my house and part of the street. I wasn't trying to be a vigilante. I just wanted evidence if anything else happened. Meanwhile, The HOA board had not yet made their final ruling, apparently stuck in internal debate. Karen was undoubtedly pressuring them, but the school board, local media, and supportive neighbors were leaning heavily on them from the other side. One scorching Saturday afternoon, I hosted another session on my driveway, newly furnished with a donated foldable table that replaced the vandalized one. The kids and I were going over some reading comprehension exercises when I noticed a white sedan creeping down the road, tinted windows obscuring the driver. It paused near my house. My heart pounded. This was an all-too-familiar sight. Suddenly, the passenger side window rolled down, and a camera lens emerged, snapping photos or video. I stood, arms crossed, glaring. The kids froze. Then, just as quickly, the window rolled up, and the car sped off. I had no idea who was behind that tinted glass, but the entire incident felt like intimidation, yet again. I hoped my newly installed camera had captured at least the license plate. As if the drive-by filming wasn't enough, I soon discovered a new thread on our community's online forum. The thread, started by an anonymous handle suspiciously reminiscent of Karen's style, decried that outsiders were invading our peaceful enclave. They posted sensationalized claims about crime rates in the areas these kids came from, painting me as naive for inviting them in. Alarmingly, a few residents chimed in agreement, but many more rushed to my defense, citing personal experiences with me or the kids I tutored, calling the post discriminatory and baseless. HOA Karen, her real name never publicly attached, was stoking the flames with every tool at her disposal. Rumor, intimidation, insinuation. It was no longer just about me. It was about the moral compass of the entire neighborhood. Meanwhile, behind the scenes, Mr. Franklin from the HOA board reached out privately. "Jessica, I can't speak officially," he said in a hushed tone over the phone. "But I want you to know that not all of us on the board agree with Ms. Wilson. We're trying to find a compromise that respects the bylaws, but also recognizes your right to do what you're doing." I thanked him, though I was wary of what compromise might mean. One evening, right after a tutoring session, I was cleaning up the driveway as the sun dipped below the horizon. The kids had just left, and I was rolling up a poster with vocabulary words. That's when Karen herself marched over, no longer content with covert operations, apparently. "This has gone far enough," she hissed, her voice trembling with anger. "I have to watch cars I don't recognize drive by. I see these children wandering around. This is not what our neighborhood is for." I placed the poster tube gently on the table, inhaling deeply before I answered. "With all due respect, Ms. Wilson, these children come straight here and leave. They cause no issues. You're the one harassing them, not the other way around." Her eyes narrowed to slits. "You think the board is going to bend to the bleeding hearts on the school board? We have property rights, Jessica. We have rules. That's why people pay premiums to live in a gated community, to avoid exactly this kind of situation." Her voice rose, sharp as broken glass. A few neighbors poked their heads out of doors to watch, and I felt my cheeks burn at the public confrontation. I tried to remain calm. These kids aren't criminals. They're just students. And last time I checked, my mortgage and taxes give me the right to have guests. She threw up her hands in disgust. "Don't say I didn't warn you." Then she stomped off. Though I tried to shake it off, her words stayed with me. It wasn't just a one-on-one spat anymore. She was making it personal, her sense of entitlement against my sense of duty to help these children. The next morning, I woke to a text from the local police officer who had previously handled my vandalism report. They'd run the plates from the white sedan captured by my cameras. It was registered to none other than a known friend of Karen's, though it was not in Karen's name. The officer cautioned me that, while suspicious, this alone wasn't evidence of wrongdoing. But it was a piece of the puzzle. Armed with that tidbit, I approached Mr. Franklin confidentially. "You want to know who's been filming my tutoring sessions, trying to gather dirt?" I asked, showing him the police text. "It's one of Karen's friends." Mr. Franklin sighed, removing his glasses and rubbing his temple. "This entire situation is a minefield. She claims she's just gathering evidence of bylaw infractions, but I suspect it's more personal. At least now, the board had some clear indication that Karen was going above and beyond normal HOA channels." Mr. Franklin assured me that the board's final ruling on the matter was coming soon, and it was likely to be in my favor. He even hinted that the board had grown tired of Karen's theatrics, especially after the negative press that had befallen the neighborhood. Finally, the day arrived. the board's official ruling. A special meeting was scheduled in the small amphitheater used for community events, a reflection of just how big this had gotten. Residents were invited to attend. I sat in the front row next to Tara, sweat gathering on my palms. The board members took their seats at a long table. Mr. Franklin cleared his throat. "Good evening, everyone. We're here to address the ongoing dispute regarding Ms. Sanders' tutoring sessions." He paused, scanning the assembled residents. Karen sat rigid near the front, arms crossed, her expression as sour as a week-old lemon. One by one, the board members shared their findings. They acknowledged that while the HOA has broad authority, it cannot override basic property rights without demonstrable harm. They found that my tutoring posed no undue noise or nuisance. They even cited the local police's assessment that no evidence existed linking the students to any wrongdoing. Then came the verdict. The board does not find sufficient reason to prohibit Ms. Sanders from continuing her tutoring sessions. She is urged to coordinate any large gatherings with the community to ensure proper parking arrangements. But otherwise, the tutoring is allowed to proceed without penalty. A murmur of relief spread through the crowd. I let out a shaky breath, gripping Tara's hand. Yet Karen wasn't having it. She leaped to her feet and practically shouted, "So you're just going to let her run a school in her driveway? Our property values will tank. You're enabling criminal elements." Mr. Franklin interrupted. "Ms. Wilson, there is no evidence of criminal activity, and this is a final decision. If you have further objections, you may file an appeal, but the board has spoken." Her face twisted in fury. For a moment, she seemed to be at a loss for words, an extraordinary feat for someone like Karen. Then she gathered her folder and stormed out, letting the door bang behind her. A hush fell over the amphitheater, and slowly, applause built among the residents who supported me. I felt tears sting my eyes, overwhelmed by both relief and the release of months of tension. With the HOA's ruling, the path seemed clear. Yet I still had concerns about Karen's next move. Would she pursue legal action? File nuisance suits? Spread more rumors? Over the next few days, I continued as normal, greeting the kids and helping them with their homework. The sense of victory made each session sweeter. I even scheduled a little celebratory get-together with the parents, bringing cookies and awarding small certificates of achievement for the children's progress. During that same week, the school board also released an official statement praising the HOA's decision. The local TV station did a short follow-up piece, which cast the resolution in a positive light. Neighborhood comes together to support education. It was a heartwarming narrative shift from the earlier tension. As for Karen, she tried to retaliate in subtle ways. She posted rants on social media, leaving negative comments about me, the kids, and even the school board. But her credibility took a hit when the public saw her stance for what it was, unfounded bias. Some neighbors reported that she was complaining about feeling ostracized, that everyone was turning against her. In my view, she had reaped what she sowed. Then came a small twist of poetic justice. The local school board considered placing an official educational outreach plaque in my driveway, praising the initiative. Hearing rumors of this, Karen apparently flew into a rage, confronting the board for trespassing on HOA territory. The board, of course, politely declined her protest. In the end, they decided not to install a physical plaque to avoid further drama, but the gesture itself gave me a private chuckle. Though the public battle was mostly over, some scars remained. The kids and their parents felt residual anxiety, worrying that if they came for tutoring, they might be stared at, photographed, or harassed. Over time, though, as no further vandalism occurred and no new letters appeared, that anxiety began to ease. The tutoring sessions became part of the neighborhood's routine, just another aspect of daily life. One day, a student named Lisa, who once hesitated to come back after seeing Karen's menacing presence, handed me a crayon drawing. It showed a group of stick-figure kids gathered around a big book with me standing at the center, a smile drawn wide. Above, in wobbly letters, she wrote, "Thank you, Miss Sanders." That small gift made every struggle worthwhile. Every so often, I'd catch sight of Karen in the neighborhood, her scowl firmly in place, eyes darting away from me as if I were invisible. There was no apology, no acknowledgement. And frankly, I didn't expect one. People like her rarely change overnight. Yet I took comfort in the knowledge that my rights had been affirmed, the kids were safe to learn, and justice, in some meaningful sense, had prevailed. Months passed, and life settled into a new normal. My tutoring program expanded slightly, with new families hearing through word of mouth. The school board remained supportive, even hinting at potential grants for community-based educational outreach. It felt surreal. What began as a simple volunteer effort had blossomed into something recognized by official channels. Karen remained an ever-present reminder that prejudice and entitlement can lurk in suburban corners. But her power had waned considerably. Rumors circulated that she might be stepping down from her self-appointed position as the neighborhood watch coordinator. Some speculated that she feared potential lawsuits or was just tired of the spotlight. Others guessed she'd simply found a new fixation. Looking back, the journey had been fraught with stress, sleepless nights, and genuine fear for my safety and that of the children. But it also revealed the best in people. The neighbors who stood up for me, the parents who refused to let intimidation rob their kids of a brighter future, and the school board that recognized the importance of accessible education. As I reflect on everything, I'm filled with gratitude for the resilience and support that ultimately prevailed. It's a testament to the power of community. Even in a place governed by strict rules and a Karen-like figure itching to wield them against others, compassion and reason can triumph. So, to everyone reading or listening, thank you for sticking around until the end of this saga. And remember, no matter how intimidating a Karen might be, standing up for what's right, especially when it comes to children's education, is always worth the fight.